Okay, I couldn't. Okay. My name is Doug Robinson, and I'm one of the co-owners of Eagle Eye Bookshop located at the corner of Claremont and North Decatur Roads. I wanted to welcome everyone to this really fine event centered around the nature of oaks. First of all, I'd like to thank Trees Atlanta for helping us put on this really good event. And we'll also want to let you know that any of the Tallamy books that are bought from Eagle Eye, a part of the proceeds goes back to support Trees of Atlanta. We also want to thank Georgia Audubon and the Native Plants of Georgia Society for helping to promote our event and Trees Atlanta's event. And finally, I want to thank Jamil Crispin. She's our marketing director for Eagle Eye Bookshop for putting a lot of this together. Tonight we have a moderator is someone you've probably heard of, a young lady named Sally Sears. Sally is a graduate of Montevallo University in Alabama, and she is a magna cum laude of Princeton University. She's been a TV journalist with several different stations in the Atlanta market, and she's a founder of the South Fork Conservatory. She's also married to another TV journalist, a fellow named Richard Belcher, which you may have heard of also. But best of all, Sally is a published author, and her book, A Wealthy Man on the Roof of the World and Other Stories, is a wonderful book about traveling around Asia, Russia, Australia, and New Zealand. And we, of course, have it for sale at Eagle Eye Bookshop. Secondly, I want to introduce our speaker tonight. It's Doug Tallamy, and he's the author of The Nature of Oaks, plus Nature's Best Hope, and bringing nature home. And you see them all right there. But before I go any farther, I need to let Greg Levine talk about the Trees Atlanta. So Greg, if you would, please.
All right, well, thank you. Just going to do a quick presentation for you all so you can get to the really, truly interesting stuff here. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you Sally and Doug for putting this on. It's really, I've heard y'all both speak, and it's always interesting and entertaining, and thanks for coming back to Atlanta. Even though it's via screen. Hopefully we'll see y'all in person soon. So my name is Greg Levine. I'm the co-executive director of Trees Atlanta. And just real quickly, a little bit about the organization. We've been around for 36 years, and my screen is not moving. There we go. We've been around for over 36 years. We are a nonprofit community group that protects and improves Atlanta's urban forests by planting, conserving, and educating people about the importance of trees. Primarily, we're going to talk about the next 2 minutes is the BeltLine Arboretum. For those that aren't familiar with the BeltLine project, the BeltLine Arboretum kind of encloses a great infrastructure project. It was created by Ryan Gravel. Most people in Atlanta know him. That's the picture of him in the bottom left. And he had this great project that he did in about 2000-ish when he was in graduate school. And it basically combined trails, transit, redevelopment, parks, reconnecting the city. It was a 22-mile loop following an old rail loop. And it went through over 25 neighborhoods, really exciting project. And in 2005, he kind of shopped it around the city. Those that know Kathy Woolard, and he shopped along with Kathy, and they were starting to make some great headways with it. And then we went and talked to Ryan about making one more component to it, which would be the making an arboretum. So when we met with Ryan, when he was like excited about adding to the project, the idea of the BeltLine was to connect people in any way that you could connect them. And we thought by adding Arboretum to it, it would not only connect people, but connect them closer to nature. And it would make this infrastructure loop more of a restoration loop, restoring the environment, connecting people to plants and into nature, ecosystems, and understanding what ecology is, which is, a lot of people don't know what ecosystems or ecology are. That's why we need more books like Doug's so people have a better understanding. It is one huge project. It brings all of our programs into one giant project, everything from tree planting to forest restoration, a lot of education opportunities, which Michelle works on quite a bit. And then of course, our main start of the organization was urban trees, planting large trees. And that's kind of the focus of the BeltLine Arboretum. And for those that don't know, arboretums are public gardens that basically are for display, demonstration, and education. And that's what we focus this 22-mile loop on. And one of our mini collections are oak trees. And you can see a number of other collections, but we have over 30 oaks species and many other cultivars. We have about 31 of the native oak trees all in one spot. And that is right from Ponce City Market that you're going to see a little bit of that with the oak leaves on the bottom. But this oak leaf installation, sculpture installation, was created to display the 32 oak trees and celebrate 33 oak trees, I think. I get back and forth from 32 to 33. But to display those oak trees and give them the celebration that they're due. We have more oak trees in almost every state in the country. The only state that I know beats us is Texas. As far as species go, I go back and forth whether California has more species than us. I think Doug probably knows. He'll probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we might have more than California. They are bigger states, so they may win out on us. But the oak leaf sculpture was created by David Landis. I'll talk about that in a second. But we have a lot of other demonstrations and education opportunities on the BeltLine. It is the longest linear arboretum in the country, but I think it may be the world as well. We'll just go ahead and continue to tout that. It's the longest arboretum in the world. And we demonstrate things like fascines in the top left-hand corner, or products like in the bottom left corner, which is called a silvacell, that basically includes more soil volume for trees so urban trees can thrive. But a little bit about the installation of the oak leaves. David Landis here made basically 32 or 3 oak leaf sculptures. Each of these leaves is in proportion with each other. Each of them represents one of the native oak trees. So it's really awesome to see this. If you want to go, the kids can run around and try to find the right oak tree by looking at the leaves. They're all installed on the BeltLine right across from Ponce City Market on a slope. It's definitely worth seeing. And you can also see all the tree species, the oak species that are planted. I think we at one point had all the 32/33. We've had a few challenges with a few species that need very sandy soils. They get root funguses pretty badly, but we're doing pretty well with it. And I hope y'all can check out the installation and also the oak trees on the BeltLine Arboretum. And there's a lot to see. Jump on the east side or go straight to the west side. We will see even more pollinators because there's a lot of meadows there as well. But as Doug is going to speak to oak trees and how important they are to pollinators, I'll just thank you for letting me throw that in. And thanks again for everyone for being here.
I think that means it's our turn. I think we've been introduced.
I'm sorry, am I introducing? I think Michelle was going to introduce you, but yes, here's Doug and Sally.
Thank you, Greg. I don't want to step on the wonderful work you're doing at Trees Atlanta, and certainly not the wonderful world at the Audubon Society, now the Georgia Audubon Society, not just Atlanta, and of course, the fabulous folks at the Georgia Native Plant Society. I would point out the native plants in my backyard, but that might seem a little too obvious. So, Dr. Doug Tallamy, professor at the University of Delaware, welcome to the Atlanta Zoom waves. We're glad you could join us.
Well, thank you. So I've already learned a lot tonight. I wasn't aware of your longest arboretum in the world. That's great.
Yeah, I think Boston needs to pay attention. Their arboretum is great. We've got some Frederick Law Olmsted parks here in town, and we do a really good job of it. But I thought, for the benefit of our guests and our friends joining us, we could try a little double Jeopardy game. Would you like that?
I will try.
Okay, this came to me because, in part, it's a wonderful time to be thinking about Jeopardy, because Atlanta's own Sanjay Gupta is guest hosting this week. So that sort of put me in mind to start out. I will give you the answer and you give me the question. Okay, a poor landscape idea, suppressing pollinators and destroying watersheds.
What is lawn?
A lawn, a grassy lawn. Bing, bing. I'll have to ring my own bell. Okay, here's another one. It's too big. It lifts up my driveway and it's going to fall on my roof.
What is a myth about planting oak trees?
A lame myth. What is your other favorite lame myth about planting oak trees?
Oh, there's 4 or 5 of them. One of them is they grow too slowly.
Mm-hmm.
If you plant them small and they get to develop their root mass, the first couple of years they do grow pretty slowly, but after that they grow as fast as any other tree. I planted oaks in my yard as acorns. We've been there 20 years and they are 30, 40 feet tall at this point, diameters of 40 some inches. So they're real trees, and it didn't take that long.
And it didn't cost that much, as I recall from your book.
Didn't cost anything. That's right.
A couple of acorn collections. Okay, here's another one. This one is for the 500. It's more like Spanish moss than English ivy in its harm to oak trees.
Mistletoe. What is mistletoe?
Mistletoe. I see that in my oak trees up and down along the South Fork of Peachtree Creek and the North Fork. It's not killing the oak tree. Is it bad? Should I cut it out and hang it at Christmas in my house?
Well, you can hang it at Christmas if you want somebody to kiss you, but it's not going to hurt your oak trees. It's a parasitic plant, but only slightly parasitic. It does photosynthesize itself. It takes a little bit of moisture and nutrients from the oak, but it's really more of a mutualism. And there's some beautiful moths like the beloved Emarginia that specialize on mistletoe, and also one of the very fancy hair streaks mistletoe specialists. So it's part of the diversity of plants that occur in our area. So yes, leave your mistletoe alone.
Okay. And I think those of us in Georgia who love our Georgia coast know that Spanish moss doesn't particularly harm things.
Yeah, same thing.
It gives you some great ghost stories. Ossabaw Island, St. Catherine, Sapelo, Jekyll. Yeah, it's good for telling ghosts and making the beautiful live oaks look good.
Yeah, we in the North envy your Spanish moss. We really do.
Well, we can send you some the next time you
come.
It
won't
send
live,
you home
though.
With some. It's a pretty good mulch, though, if you like it. It disintegrates slowly. Here's another one. This amount of yard that plants need for breeding birds.
70% of your landscape should be native plants if you want to have a sustainable landscape. So what is 70% of your yard?
Thank you for giving it in the form of a question.
Yeah,
Alex Trebek, you're listening. I hope you're liking that we've got the form down. Okay. And now we're getting into the stuff that newscasts are made of. The perfect way to preserve food for over a week without a refrigerator.
Right. What is a paralyzed caterpillar? It's paralyzed by a wasp, which stung it, and then it's stiff as a board, paralyzed, but it's alive. And then they carry that paralyzed caterpillar back to their nest, and then they lay an egg on it, and the egg hatches, and the wasp larva eats the caterpillar kind of alive, but it keeps it from rotting. If they had killed the caterpillar, it would have rotted before the egg even hatched. So this way, it's the same as putting the caterpillar in the refrigerator, keeping that meat healthy in a good state so that the young wasp can eat it.
It sounds like Night of the Living Dead.
It
fact,
does.
It is.
It is, yes.
Okay. And here's another one. This one's sort of X-rated for the top of the middle of the night newscasts. Slave makers throttle the queen, kill the workers, and kidnap the children. What's the question?
What are temnothorax ants? These are tiny little ants that live, one of the places they live is inside of acorns that have been hollowed out by acorn weevils. So when the weevil leaves the acorn, it leaves a hole, and it's a hollow acorn, and the ants go in there, and that's where they live. The entire colony lives inside the acorn. But they do have that nasty habit of being slave makers. But they're not alone. There are a lot of ant species that do that.
Well, and is there a cannibal whiff to this thing too, so that we can really wrap up all the misery in the world in one quick question?
There probably is, because protein in an ant colony is very valuable. So if somebody dies, they don't throw the body out. They do recycle it.
Okay. Okay, well, enough of this. Here's a better one. Poor taste and nutrition, and makes more noise, and it creates mulch in the spring.
What are marcescent leaves? Marcescent leaves. So that's, you might have noticed that some of your oaks, particularly in the white oak group, don't drop their leaves in the fall. They turn brown, but they stay on the tree, particularly on lower branches or on younger trees. And what they're doing is they're surrounding the new buds for next year. And
that's the bad taste, the new buds.
That's the bad. Well, it protects those buds because in the old days, we had a lot of giant mammals here. We had giant sloths. We had 3 species of mammoths. We had a lot of what we call browsers that wanted to eat those new buds all winter long. But if you surround them with dead leaves, the thinking was they wouldn't eat them. And it also makes noise when you're eating them. And that, of course, attracts the predators. So, and then you go up about 18 feet and all the marcescence stops. The leaves drop. And that's because that's as high as the giant sloth could reach, was 18 feet up.
So when I drive through the beautiful and hike along the creek and see the beeches growing down the valley of a hill, I see the beautiful tender colors, coppery almost, and they get paler and paler and more translucent, transparent as the season nears spring, but they're not up on the top of the tree. That's just on the bottom branches.
That's marcescence, and beech trees are in the same family as oaks.
Okay.
So same reasoning, yes.
Well, it's beautiful, and I never did quite know why some trees hold their leaves in the winter and some don't. And I know that Doug Robinson is wondering the same thing. So we got your answer for you, Doug. Here's one more question. I think we've got 2 more quick ones, and then maybe in a few minutes we hope to get to some questions from the folks who are watching this, because they certainly send in a lot of good ones in advance. The best place to look for mushrooms, tasty truffles, and that fabulous morel.
What is oak leaf litter? The humus created by oak leaves underneath the oak tree. You know, a big oak drops 700,000 leaves each year. That's enough to cover 4 tennis courts if you spread them all out together. And oak leaves are filled with tannins and lignins, and they don't break down very quickly. So a single oak leaf can take 3 years to break down. All of that creates a wonderful blanket that covers the soil, slowly releases its nutrients. And of course, the soil is more of a living entity than above ground. There are more species that live in the soil and more individuals underground than on top of the ground. But they all need high moisture. And if you take away the leaf litter, the soil dries out, it gets sunbaked, and all of those guys disappear. And that includes the fungi and all the things that help nutrients transfer to the roots of the tree. So oak leaves are the best leaf litter, is what I'm trying to say.
Good. So you're making a case that my friend Sally Dean loves to make, which is we ought to get rid of leaf blowers. She likes it for the audio impact, but I think she's perhaps right about keeping the leaf litter is a good thing.
Yeah, it's, you're throwing away all of the nutrients of your property each year. And then we go buy mulch and fertilizer and everything else, which is never as good. So yes, we should keep every leaf that falls on your property should stay on your property.
Okay. And I did read in your book that one of the things that oaks do is help Greg Levine and I have walked some of the trails along the South Fork of Peachtree Creek and noticed invasives coming in. The Japanese, chaff flower, which nobody likes. That's a really bad one, born in on dogs' tails often. But the Japanese Stiltgrass, yes. Yeah. And oaks don't support it. Is that good?
Oak leaf litter suppresses it better than anything else. Yeah. I mean, that's a miserable plant. It grows almost anywhere. It grows in deep shade. But one of the ways to keep Japanese stiltgrass at bay is to keep those leaves, oak leaves on the ground. Things like maple leaves and birch leaves, they break down so quickly that it doesn't work, but not oak leaves.
Okay, well, here is my last one. I'd say this is the $1,000 question because I've got a prop to do it with. Here, I'm going to try to make the right sound for this. It's the answer to this Jeopardy question is mussels creating this soda can sound 300 times a second. What's the question?
What is a cicada's tympanum? That is the structure that through mussels pulling, it's a clicking sound. Click in, click out, click in, click in, and it does it 300 times per second. That creates the buzz that you hear from cicadas. So I don't think you had the periodical cicada this year, but we did. The 17-year cicada. It
didn't get down to Atlanta. They got it in North Georgia, and they got it big time in Indiana and some of the Midwestern states.
Right, we got it big time too, and it's impressive. I'll be 87 next time they come, so I had to take full advantage this time. Took lots of pictures and had fun with the cicadas. Well, only the males do that, by the way, because it takes a lot of energy to make that buzz. And when it comes to reproduction, it's always the male that gets stuck with the most energetic job. So this way, the male sits there and he spends that energy, and the female would find the males that sing the loudest. But she wants to save her energy because eggs are expensive. She wants to use the energy to make eggs.
You've given us a rousing introduction to why we should plant oaks, why we should do what we can in our yards. In your earlier books, you've reminded us that it's just really no good looking at the glass half full and bemoaning what we can't fix, because we can fix some stuff. You want to rattle off some of your opening ideas about how each of us in our own environment can make a difference in global warming?
Well, every person on the planet requires a healthy ecosystem. So why doesn't everybody on the planet have the responsibility of good earth stewardship? It's funny because we've got a few ecologists and a few conservation biologists, and everybody else seems to have a green light to destroy everything. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't fill that glass. So everybody does have a responsibility of good earth stewardship. If you own property, there's what better place to do it, right where you own. This way, you don't have to think about all the earth's problems. You'll get depressed if you do that. Just worry about your little slice of the earth. And there's several things you can do. You can reduce the lawn. You can get rid of your invasive plants. You can put in what I call keystone plants, and oaks are the best keystone plant. You can turn out your lights because your lights are killing insects at night. All of these things enhance the function of the ecosystem on your yard. And if everybody did that, 86% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. We'd be 86% done. We wouldn't, the World Wildlife Fund says we've lost 70% of the wildlife. No, 2/3 of the wildlife since 1970. But you can turn it around. You can increase the wildlife on your property just by doing those things.
Well, we like to call ourselves, and it's true, Atlanta is a city in a forest. And if you ever have the delight of flying into, let me get all of this right, Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson International Airport, you will see it, and it's gorgeous. And it's private property where most of our forest is. And given all of our laws about protecting private property, that means we really need to encourage each other to do it. We cannot count on it being a public process, right?
Well, another really important thing about private property is what you do on that property impacts everybody else. So yes, you own it, but you don't have the right to destroy everything for everybody else. So, you know, if a river ran through your property, you would understand you can't pour cyanide in the river. You'd get it, that that's not the right thing to do, even though it's going through your property and you privately own that. Well, the same thing. And if we plant an invasive species and it escapes our property, which it will, that's the same thing. That's like releasing smallpox spores. If we have giant lawns that destroy our watersheds, that doesn't just impact us, it impacts everybody else. So yes, it's your private property, but you do have a responsibility of managing it in a way that helps everybody.
Well, let's get at one other question that I brought up with you a little earlier. Today in the mail just arrived this issue of National Geographic. How am I doing, Michelle? Am I showing it? It's the current issue, and it talks very much about how the poorer parts of Los Angeles have fewer trees than the wealthier parts of Los Angeles. Therefore, fewer trees, less shade, more heat, and of course, a lot fewer of the things that you remind us birds and bugs are noted for. What's going on with that, and is it a public obligation as well as a private one? We should get our tax money spent on this somehow, or we should encourage our elected officials to do more.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that is not a problem just in Los Angeles. That's pretty much countrywide. And I'm not sure what drives it, but we need to get more trees into all of our cities, everywhere, not just in the rich sections.
Yeah.
You know, this becomes a sociology issue instead of an ecological issue. But the benefits that come from planting trees need to be delivered to everybody. I mean, it's just common sense. So I wish I had a good answer to why that is the way it is, but it's common everywhere. Phoenix, New York, you name it. The poorer neighborhoods have fewer trees. And there's some very interesting studies correlating what happens when you have trees and when you don't. So adding a tree to an apartment complex, they've done controlled studies where you have identical apartment complex, you put trees here and you don't have them in another place. Test scores of the people that live where the trees are go up. There are fewer divorces. There's less crime. There's reduced illness. It's all crazy. And the reasoning, you know, they've been studying it for a long time. Apparently our relationship with trees reduces stress. So it reduces our stress hormone. And when there's less stress, we do everything better. We have better relationships. We learn better. We heal better. So it's that simple. You put the trees back and all of those things improve.
So plant a tree, save your marriage.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm for that. I'm for that. I did notice in this article about Los Angeles, the only trees they're planting, the only trees they named in the article was a crepe myrtle, which is not my favorite because it supports nothing in Georgia, and the pink trumpet tree, which is also not a native to this country. Yeah. What do you think? Should any, this is not exactly a trick question, should any municipal agency in the United States plant anything except oaks?
Oh, well, yes, we don't want just oaks. You want a diversity of trees, but you want a diversity of native trees because they're the ones that support the food web. If you plant just crepe myrtles, you have no birds. So if people made the connection, you know, in order to have one family of chickadees in your yard, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars for them to reproduce, just to get to the point where the birds leave the nest. They only forage about 50 meters from the nest. So if you don't have 6,000 or to 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks in the nest, you don't have that one breeding family of birds. And we want a lot of birds around, not just one family. So we need tens of thousands of caterpillars. Where do they come from? They come from the native trees that produce them. Oaks produce more caterpillars than anything, but crepe myrtles produce zero. Ginkgos produce zero. All of these non-native trees that we decorate with are not supporting the food web. They're there just as decorations. So I tell people to think of them as if it's a statue. It's pretty, but it's not part of the local ecosystem. And when you only have statues, you've got a dead landscape.
So my friend Henning von Schmeling at the Chattahoochee Nature Center says there should be a law against any city in the country planting Great myrtles. I think you would probably put ginkgos on that list. That's not
Well,
exactly only plant
yeah.
oaks, but it is pretty clear about the restorative value of those non-native trees, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, there's two classes. There's things like ginkgos and crepe myrtles, which are not invasive. They're non-native, but they stay where you put them.
Yeah.
Then there's things like Callery pear or Bradford pear, which do not stay where you plant them. They are invasive. They're equally non-native. They're equally unsupportive of the food web, but they spread everywhere and they replace the native plants that do support the food web. So that's doubly bad.
Well, I think we can, I think we can hope that doesn't continue. Doug, it looks like you've got some questions for us, as well as some thoughts on some of these books. I've got a few more questions of my own, but I'd love to help us get started with some of the questions that our friends are bringing up.
Okay, and when you say Doug, do you mean Doug Robinson? Or
Yes,
Doug
I do.
Tallamy?
I'm sorry. Let
I
me
know it.
celebrate Eagle Eye Books for a minute on North Decatur Road in Atlanta, right at Claremont, which does have some good trees and lots of oaks on it. You've got 3 of Dr. Tallamy's books right there, and I know folks are calling about them. What are some of the questions we're getting asked?
Okay, there's a question here that can the leaves be too dense around a tree? Should we spread them around?
Excuse me. If they fall naturally, it is unlikely that they're going to be too dense. But if you rake up leaves from a big part of your lawn and pile them under a tree, then yes, they can be too dense. They can smother the plants that you want to come up underneath there. But you know, ferns and your spring ephemerals, all those things will grow through a normal layer of leaves. So you get that blanket protecting the ground, but you can still, it's not going to eliminate all of the other plants that you want. You do want good ground covers. You want wild ginger, foam flower, and those ferns and mayapple. All of those things are good, but they'll grow right through that leaf litter if it's not too thick.
Okay. We have another question about the importance of the live oaks on the Georgia coastal islands, and how important are they in terms of the forest ecosystem?
Well, they're critically important. I mean, that is the dominant tree on those islands and along the coast. It's adapted to salt spray. You know, they're wonderfully large, long-lived trees, great big canopies. So many creatures depend on them. But let me bring up an interesting point about the live oak, and that is there is a miniature live oak too. It's a dwarf form. So a lot of people with smaller properties can actually get the dwarf live oak and plant it in their smaller properties, because that's one of the common complaints you hear about oaks. Oh, I don't have a big enough property, it gets too big. There are smaller oaks. There's the Georgia oak, Quercus georgiana, which is another dwarf oak that it only occurs in small parts of Georgia, but occasionally it's in the nursery trade, and that's another wonderful oak that can go into small properties.
Okay, cool. I asked my sister about that. She sells trees in Texas every day. So I'll ask her about these oak trees you just named. There's a question from Alexandra. How can I grow an oak from an acorn and own up?
It's easy. It's easy. Got to collect that acorn. The hardest part about growing an oak from an acorn is protecting the acorn from all the things that want to eat it. So there are four types of oaks around the country. There are 4 big main oak sections: the white oak group, the red oak group, the live oak group, and then there's a canyon oak group out west. But so in Georgia, you've got the white oak group, the red oak group, and the live oak group. The red oak group acorns germinate in the spring, so you can collect them in the fall. You can put them in a little peat moss in a Ziploc bag with a little bit of moisture and put them in your refrigerator all winter long, and then in the spring plant them and they'll germinate. The white oak group germinates in the fall. So they have to go in the ground in the fall, and they'll send down a root. They won't put up any leaves until the spring, but they send down that root in the fall. So you've got to put them in the ground in the fall. And you know, I have to admit, I don't know when the live oak group germinates, but it's one of those, spring or fall. But what I do now, I have done it both ways. I have planted the acorns right into the ground, and I have success. But all winter long, you've got mice and you've got voles, you've got deer, you've got squirrels. All of these things are trying to dig those acorns up and eat them. So you get a lot of mortality when you put the acorn out in the fall. So what I do now to get better survivorship is plant it in a pot in the fall. Let the root go down. And then all I have to do is protect that pot from the mice and everything else. But then you get a nice little oak tree. And you plant it in the spring. The next big challenge, of course, it's going to grow just fine. And the first thing it does is put out this massive root system. I think there's 3 or 4 times, or maybe it's 10 times the amount of root biomass that develops the first year in a seedling than leaf biomass. So it looks like it's not doing anything, but it's really putting out this great root system. What you have to do then is protect it from the deer. I'm not sure what the deer pressure are in Atlanta, or what it is in Atlanta, but it's terrible around here. And if I have a young oat seedling out and it's not protected, the deer will eat it. And it's because we got too many deer. But I see you put a little cage around it, make sure that the deer don't eat it. And that oak will grow much faster than you think it will. So the trick is keeping other things from eating it, not really planting it. That's easy. That's the easy part.
Okay, good. Thank you. We have a question from Marnie. Thoughts about water oaks. Marnie lives in Decatur, and they have many water oaks throughout the city. And Marnie has a big one in their yard. Any thoughts about water oaks?
Well, it's one of the good species of oaks. We have 91 species of oaks in this country. I guess Greg was asking earlier whether Georgia has more oaks than any other state. I think California has 23 or 24 species. So Georgia very well might have more oaks than California. And the water oak is one of them. But oaks grow in all kinds of situations. There are oaks that like acid soil. There are oaks that like limey basic soil, oaks that like shallow rocky soil, oaks that like bottomland. And the water oak is one of those oaks that likes bottomland. It does well in damper soils, not really wet soils, but damper soils down near water courses. But it's a big tree. It's a good tree, and it drops out when it gets to southern Delaware, so it doesn't quite reach my house. So it's one of the oaks we don't have.
Okay, thank you. And this question is from Alexander. How can we take better care of trees in urban areas under stress?
Well, my recommendation is to plant them in areas that don't put them under stress. Typically, we don't give those roots very much space to grow in. So that's, one of the good things about oaks is that they have such big root systems, so they're great at managing our watershed. But that's a limitation in cities where we only give them a little teeny square. So right away they're stressed because we're not giving them enough space to grow. And that's because in cities we use cement as a default landscape. We do that because nobody wants to take care of the land around, where people walk. You can have a sidewalk and everything, but to have the entire city paved over that's just laziness, and it ruins our watersheds, and we know that. So it'd be much better to have less cement and more space for our oaks, and then they won't be as stressed.
This question, well, we must have people from California watching or tuned into this. Is there any danger of California oak blight or some other plague repeating the chestnut elm story with our oaks?
Unfortunately, yes, there is. And they're probably talking about sudden oak death syndrome. There's a number of oak diseases that we have brought to this country. Sudden oak death syndrome, oak leaf scorch, bacterial leaf scourge. Oak wilt is one that's come up from South America recently, and they are killing a lot of our oaks. It's a serious problem. It's probably not going to be as dire as the chestnut blight was, which took out the chestnuts awfully quickly. But we made a big mistake with the chestnuts. They started to die from the chestnut blight. So the loggers said, well, they're all going to die, and cut them all down anyway. There were probably 1 or 2% of our chestnuts that had some resistance to the chestnut blight, but we logged them and didn't get to find out which ones they were. We don't want to do that with our oaks. I hear people saying already, don't plant an oak, it's going to get sick. I say just the opposite. Plant more oaks than ever, so that the ones that don't get sick, they're the resistant ones that we need to favor. And if you get a resistant oak, the blue jays will help spread that genotype for you, because they take acorns and they fly up to a mile from the parent tree and they tap it below the surface of the soil. And then they use that acorn for winter food. But they only remember where 1 in 4 acorns that they bury are. So they're really planting, for every 4 acorns they bury, they're planting 3 trees. But they only take the oaks from the healthiest trees, the acorns from the healthiest tree. They don't, and sick trees don't even make any acorns. So they're spreading the resistant varieties for us if we plant them. So yes, there's a chance they'll get sick and die, but that's why we got to plant more than ever.
And this question probably comes from the South. How do you convince people not to spray for mosquitoes and not to treat their lawns with chemicals?
We've got to change our culture.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes, that's pretty easy, because if they understood the logic of it, I'm not trying to protect mosquitoes, particularly the ones that are giving us problems. They're invasive species. It's Aedes aegypti from Africa and the Asian tiger mosquito. These guys are mosquitoes that we brought in, and a lot of diseases with them. So we do want to get rid of them. But you don't do that. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You control mosquitoes in the larval stage. So we have a big industry, Mosquito Joe, and he's going around spraying everything. In order to control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of the adults. Mosquito Joe kills between 10% and 50%. So he doesn't come close to actually controlling the mosquitoes. But what he is killing is all the other insects that is feeding the chickadees and all the other things that require those insects. I don't know if you followed the news last fall during monarch migration, there were huge monarch kills when they flew through Mosquito Joe's fogging. So he says it only kills mosquitoes. No, it kills every insect it comes in contact with, and it doesn't really work. So what I am trying to get people to do is use mosquito dunks. So this is a product, you buy it in the hardware store. It's a little disc of Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera. And you get a bucket and you fill it full of water and put in a handful of straw or hay and let it sit there for a couple of days. The diatoms and the algae that mosquito larvae eat will build up in that bucket. And that's where the mosquito larvae or the mosquito adults will lay their eggs. Then you put in a mosquito dunk, the larvae eat the dunk and it kills them in your little bucket. So you're creating a trap that pulls in the mosquitoes to oviposit in your little bucket. And if everybody had a mosquito dunk bucket in their yard, you would have far fewer mosquitoes, because that works and it only kills mosquitoes and it's cheap. So all of those things are good.
I think my internet connection's back again. Doug,
Yes,
I'd like
Doug
Good
to see you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I would love to ask you one, though, if I can really quickly, because when I think about mosquitoes, I think of, and caterpillars, I think, bugs. I have some friends who just don't like bugs, and bugs fall on your head from the oak tree. But your book has showed me lovely, lovely caterpillars. Do you think you could show us some of the pictures that I am happy to say I recognized you yourself took?
I can. I will. Let's see. I'll play from current slide.
They're like jewels. Look at that. Ooh.
Okay.
That
So
looks like some of my editors.
these are just some of the caterpillars that get on oaks. This is the buck moth. That's the white marked tussock moth. This is the saddled prominent, the double line prominent, the white dotted prominent, the checkered fringe prominent. This is called the laugher.
Why is that called the
lace
laugher,
cap
Doug? That's
caterpillar.
the laugher. Can you go back to that and tell us why you call it that?
Because look at the head, it looks like it's laughing at you. That's why.
Okay.
I don't make up these common names, but I think that's really it. It's got that decoration. Okay, that's the two-spotted oak punky. That's the skiff moth, the white blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the banded tussock moth, the hickory tussock moth, the red line panapoda, the yellow neck caterpillar, the smaller parasa, the unicorn caterpillar, the crown slug. Those are called slug caterpillars because the head is tucked up underneath. They remind people of slugs, but they're not slimy and they're not slugs. That's the streak dagger moth, the epilated dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the red humped oak worm, the orange humped oak worm, the pink striped oak worm, the confused wood grain, the spiny oak slug. I know that's one of your favorites.
Oh,
beautiful
beautiful.
Caterpillar.
Beautiful.
And there is my favorite. This is the spun glass caterpillar. But you know, there are just in the mid-Atlantic states, there are 557 species of caterpillars that use oaks, and nationwide there's 952 species. So this is just a small portion of the caterpillars that oaks are producing. And if you don't like caterpillars, call them bird food. Oaks are bird feeders. So don't say, oh, there's a little worm in my hair. It's bird food, and that's a good thing. You know, bird food's a good thing.
I do know bird food's a good thing. Tell me what happened when you took that picture, or you were trying to take that picture, because it's just lovely. It looks like, as I think one of our friends said,
Yeah, your internet's going in and out again, but that's why it's called the spun glass caterpillar. It was interesting. The first time I saw one of these, one of my students found one in my yard, and he brought it to me in a glass jar. Well, I always want to take pictures of these things. So I don't want to take a picture of a caterpillar in a glass jar. I wanted it to be on a leaf. So it's slowly crawling out of the jar, but I wanted to hurry it along. So I took a pencil and I poked it in the rear end. It immediately dropped most of its little tentacles, which ruined the picture. But it also told me what those little tentacles are for. If an ant comes up to attack this, that tentacle breaks off in its mouth. And I'll bet there's an odor associated with it too that's probably distasteful. So they eventually grow back, but I had to wait till I found another one that didn't drop its tentacles before I could get a good picture of it.
That's terrific. That's just, it's lovely. Lovely. And I think that if that fell on my head, I would be a lot less squeamish than if one of those green striped ones did. Doug, Doug Robinson, have we got some more questions?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do, Sally.
Good.
This is from Joy Carter. I planted a Chamard red oak 2 years ago. How long should I wait before I prune it?
Oh, a million years.
Stump the band. No?
You don't have to prune your trees unless there's a specific problem. If a branch dies, and that would be a much older tree, you can leave that dead branch, and it provides a home and lots of things to eat for a lot of birds. But if you want to prune it out for aesthetic reasons, I understand that. If you're trying to shape your oak into a particular shape, that makes sense. And if it's got multiple leaders when it's very young, yes, trim one of the leaders out. I would do it during the wintertime after it's dropped its leaves, after it's absorbed all the nutrients from its leaves. But for the most part, you don't need to prune your oaks at all. That's true for most of your trees. I know the guy who prunes your trees comes to your house and tells you need to prune your trees, but there's kind of a conflict of interest there. So
help me out with oaks as helping the heat island effect, and also how an oak helps with watershed management, and not just a single oak, but maybe a grove of oaks.
Okay, well, the large oaks, of course, have big spreading canopies. So when it rains hard, hard raindrops can actually compact the soil, but when they're hitting the leaves of the oak tree, it breaks, it softens it. So then you just get dripping instead of this pounding rain. So in that sense, it does not compact your soil. That keeps the soil able to absorb moisture faster. It can infiltrate. You want to get the water that falls from the sky to infiltrate to the water table rather than run off on the surface. So the oak canopy does that. The tree itself absorbs, thousands of gallons of water in the bark and all on those leaves before it even hits the ground. Then once it's in the ground, it's the root system of plants that slows that flow of water to the sea. You want to hold it on the property as much as possible. So any plant that has a large root system is really good at managing the watershed. That once the water infiltrates into the ground, it moves as a sheet very slowly into our streams and rivers. That's the way it ought to be. You don't get stormwater runoff. So the more infiltration we can get, the better off we're going to be. It also cleans the water as it's moving through the soil. When it runs along the surface, it gets dirty. It takes all the dirt. It takes all the oil from our cars and the pesticides and everything else into our watershed. So plants with big root systems help manage the watershed, and oaks have the biggest root systems. So they're the best at doing that.
Before my internet goes out again, if it does, I've got one more confession to make. You can see behind me is my bird feeder. Well, actually, this is my husband's bird feeder because it was a wonderful Father's Day gift, I thought, here in the month of June. And I filled it with bird seed. And I thought, oh, all my hungry little friends, that Joy Carter, she's an Audubon friend. Well, all the birds will come here and eat it's been a week. Nobody's eaten anything. And then I read in your book, The Reason Why.
Yeah, the best time to start a bird feeder would be the fall.
Okay, well, I'm getting a head start.
Because baby birds don't eat seeds. There's only a few. The finches and the doves can feed their baby seeds, but everything else relies on insects. So when they're rearing their young, they're not going to go to your bird feeder. They're going to be looking for the insects in your yard. So it's better to plant a bird feeder, the plants that make the insects that the birds need. During the wintertime, feeding the birds is a good thing because it supplements. We've got an awful lot of paved area and buildings and everything else that are not making good bird food. So we need to supplement their diet in the winter with seeds. The birds that don't eat seeds they're migrants. They move further south into Central America and South America. So the birds that spend the winter here, most of them can make it on seeds. So feeding the birds in the wintertime is a good thing.
I've got a good one, and my friend Moshi Coleman wonders, she likes lightning bugs. Some people call them fireflies. What do we do to get more of them? I see fewer now than I did growing up in Alabama as a child, but maybe that's just life, right? No, probably not.
No, that's death. That's death. That's what that is. Fireflies they're beetles, and as larvae, they are predators that live in leaf litter. So if you rake up all your leaves and get rid of your leaf litter, you've gotten rid of where they live. And when they're in that leaf litter, they're eating other invertebrates. They're eating insects, they're eating worms. So it's part of that vibrant leaf litter community that allows fireflies to exist. They also need high humidity. So if you have dry areas and it all dries out, you lose your fireflies. If you use ChemLawn, you put down a whole bunch of chemicals on your lawn, you've killed your fireflies. And if you keep lights on all the time, it messes up their communication at night. Of course, they're lighting up to it's the daddy and the mommy talking to each other. How do we find each other and make babies? And when everything's lit up, it messes up their communication. So if you have fireflies, you're doing several things right. If you don't, I would start with trying to accumulate some leaf litter so that you can have the habitat. Everything needs habitat. Habitat, by the way, is not just a place to live. It's something to eat. That's an important component that's often missing from the way we landscape.
You've brought up two things that remind me of the need for security that gets in the way of our habitat restoration. And one of them, of course, is bright lights at night to keep us allegedly safe. And the other, of course, is planting things that you can see through, and that's not necessarily trees. Yeah. What's the counter to that, Doug?
Well, we have global insect decline now. We've lost 45% of the insects on the planet, and the insects are the little things that run the world. So whether we like insects or not, they're not optional. They're absolutely essential to the way things work on planet Earth. We've got to reverse insect decline. And it's turning out, the research is showing that light pollution at night is one of the major causes of insect decline. It's killing our insects at night. So what I tell people to do is turn out their lights. And if you don't want to do that because the bad man's going to come, then
Right.
put a motion sensor on your security light at night, and it'll only turn on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you'll realize is the bad man doesn't come very often. But if you don't want to do that, there's another alternative, and that is take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best because they are the least attractive to nocturnal insects. And they're the most energy efficient. So you can have your night light without killing the insects by using those yellow LED bulbs. And that's really important because, I mean, look at the night light, the night map of the US. We have lit up everything. No wonder the insects are declining. As far as landscaping so that you can see everywhere, that's a tougher issue. If we live in the East, it wants to be eastern deciduous forest. So we take away all the plants and all the trees, then you don't have trees Atlanta, you don't have Atlanta being Tree City. So you got to put the trees back. We have to, move to I would say if you don't like trees, move to the Great Plains because they don't belong out there. Move to the area where you're most comfortable. How about that?
Doug Robinson, I bet we've got a few more with the time we have left. This has just been a great romp through a terrific book, by the way. I may have read it even more than you. I think that's what you said, Doug
I think
Tallamy.
you did, yes.
Yes, Sally. We have a question from Lisa. Of all the oaks, which one is your favorite and why? There you go, putting you on the spot.
Well, no, that's an easy one for me.
Oh, okay.
The white oak, Quercus alba, is my
Yes.
favorite. Why? I think it's pretty. It's got a wonderful shape. I like superlatives, and that's a superlative tree. It gets huge. It lives. Our oldest oaks are white oaks. It supports the most insects. We talk about all those caterpillars that eat oaks. We've compared different oak species in the East, and white oak comes out on top. So those are enough reasons for me. And plus, I think it has the prettiest leaves. I don't like those sharp little points. I like rounded points or rounded edges. That's white oak.
Well, Doug, let me kind of agree with you from the perspective of a woodworker. I do a good bit of woodworking. And I like mahoganies and the cherries and other, the walnuts, but I really love working with the oak, the white oak. And the white oak is a little heavier than the red oak, and it will last longer if you use it for an outdoor project that you're building, because it's very resistant. And I just love the way when you cut white oak, or for that matter red oak too, but when you do what's called quarter sawn lumber out of it, it's just beautiful with all the rays through it. So yep, white oak is my favorite.
And those attributes make it one of the best trees for storing carbon, because it is so dense. It stores more carbon than other trees.
And I noticed that July is a great month out of the year for noticing caterpillars. Why is that? Here, at least in Georgia, why is late July the best time to see southern oaks full of caterpillars?
Well, in the springtime, the birds have eaten most of them, so they're hard. They're hard to find. Remember, each bird in your yard is eating hundreds of caterpillars a day. So that's a lot of caterpillars that are no longer there. And believe me, they are much better at finding them than we are. So when I look for caterpillars, I'm happy to find one in the spring because the birds have gotten them all. A lot of moths, most of the caterpillars are moths. For every species of butterfly we have, there are 19 species of moths. So the caterpillars we're talking about that are driving the food web are mostly moths, and a lot of them overwinter as eggs. And so in the spring, those eggs hatch. and the caterpillars develop, the birds eat them. So the next generation of adults are laying eggs right now, you know, in June. And then it's the end of July by the time those caterpillars are big enough to find. So that's another reason you find more at the end of July. So the end of July and early August is the best time to be looking for caterpillars.
So we can look forward to that now. And you go out
Mm.
underneath your tree and give it a little nap, a little whack. And if you have a sheet underneath, caterpillars will rain down into your hands, or at least one or two, into the sheet, and you can actually look at them. What can we look forward to in August and September when it's pretty darn hot?
Yeah. You know, another good way to find caterpillars is to go out at night. The caterpillars are hiding from the birds during the daytime. So they come out and they feed openly at night. So go out with a flashlight and look up in the tree, and that's easy to see them. In August, you get to see a lot of things happening on your tree. That's the time that you're going to hear the katydids the most, all throughout August, actually late July and August. Those are orthopterans. They're related to grasshoppers, but they're the ones that are singing katydid, 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 which to me is a wonderful sound. I grew up with that sound when I was camping, and you've got some wonderful katydids in Georgia. So you can enjoy that. By the end of August, early September, it's a good time to look for walking sticks that have been in the canopy of your oak most of the year. You know, it's hard to see up there, but then they start to come down at the end of the year. August is also a good time for the annual cicada. So you don't have the periodical cicada, but you've got the annual cicada. It comes out every single year. And it's actually bigger than the periodical cicada, and it makes a buzzing sound too. And then you also have the cicada killer. It's the largest wasp we have in this country, and people are afraid of it, but I have never heard of anybody being stung by a cicada killer. What chases you in your yard is the male cicada killer, because what he's doing, he's patrolling. What the female digs a hole in your yard, and she goes and stings a cicada and stuffs it down the hole and lays an egg on it. Well, the male wants to be there when she comes out so that he gets to mate with her again, so that the next egg she lays, he'll be the father of. So he chases everybody away from where the female is, including you. He doesn't want you to mate with her. So that scares people. This big wasp comes flying at you, but he doesn't even have a stinger. He's totally harmless. They're something you see in August as well. You can look forward to seeing them.
Yeah, that's got a nice scary thought to it. Absolutely. That's also the time when we can start to see monarch butterflies returning through Atlanta from their mission up north in, you know, Canada and eastern Maine and places. What else should we
I
be
saw
looking
one
for?
today. I
You
saw
saw-
one today.
He's heading north. She is. That's good. Yeah.
I saw a
Oh,
monarch
that's-
butterfly today.
Well, that's exciting. That is exciting. We've been planting milkweed up and down the creeks in Atlanta, in part in collaboration, the South Fork Conservancy working with the Chattahoochee Nature Center to grow the various native milkweed forests, other things like milkweed. But why is it that milkweed's so important for butterflies, Mr. Tallamy?
Well, it's particularly important for the monarch. You know, most of the insects that eat plants are what we call host plant specialists. So in order to get around the plant defenses, they've specialized on particular group of plants. They get very good at beating that particular plant at its own defenses. So the monarch has specialized on milkweeds. It's got enzymes that can store and excrete and detoxify the cardiac glycosides that are in milkweeds. It's got behavioral adaptations that can block the flow of that sticky latex sap. Most other insects can't do that. But in developing all those adaptations for milkweeds, it didn't develop any adaptations for oaks or anything else. So it's locked into eating milkweeds. And that's true for most of the insects that eat plants. They get locked into eating the plants they specialized on. So milkweeds don't support that many insects, but they're critical to the ones that they do support. You know, another thing, if you want to help the monarchs in the fall, that's not the time to plant milkweeds because they're not blooming or anything else. What the monarchs want when they're migrating is blooming plants like fall asters and goldenrods. Those would be the two most important ones that provide the nectar that get the monarchs down to Mexico. They're not reproducing anymore as they're flying south. So they're done with milkweeds, but they do need those flowering plants.
Well, that's good to know. That's very good to know. And I know we have really been wonderful to have so many participants in this call, and they've stayed attentive. And I know we may have a few more questions, but before we have to wrap up, let me ask if you were going to give me sort of those David Letterman countdowns, 10 trees that we ought to be planting, big, middle, and small, tall, medium, and short. We've talked about oaks. We've talked a little bit about beeches and cherries. What about mid-level? Do we want a lot of dogwoods or not? What would be a better one, an elderberry or a serviceberry?
Those are all good questions. Each one of those plants are doing some good things. The most important plants in your landscape are going to be the big trees, because they are making most of the food. Many of our smaller understory trees are very good at making the berries that birds need at particular times of year. So the serviceberry makes berries the earliest. The earliest berries that are produced in the year come from serviceberries. Dogwoods are very good in making berries that are high in fat in the fall. So our fall migrants need a lot of fat to fuel their migration. So that's a good one. We don't have that many small understory trees and shrubs in North America. If you go into a forest that's not decimated by too many deer or invasive plants, the understory plants usually are young canopy trees that are just waiting for a spot in the canopy to open up, and then they'll grow up. But things like witch hazel are good. They're supporting some caterpillars, not that many. Viburnums would be good. We think of them as shrubs, but Viburnum dentatum easily gets to be 12 feet tall. So it's really it can be a small tree, and they make wonderful berries that are high in fat as well, and they're good for caterpillars. Over 100 caterpillars are on our native viburnums.
Well, here's one that Michelle Diaz might like about the BeltLine, because there is a host, an alley virtually, of amelanchiers, serviceberries, on the West Side Trail, which is just beautiful when they're in bloom. It's a short little ephemeral bloom time, but boy, it's like walking through snow in the air. And the BeltLine has done a wonderful job, not just planting them, but maintaining them, which is, it seems to me, one of the harder parts of this sort of thing, and particularly on public land. It's keeping them going, and Park Pride here in Atlanta does a great job of that. They also remind me that great protein source, poison ivy, has kind of a checkered relationship with people. What would you say about my poison ivy plants growing up a tree?
It does. Well, poison ivy is another plant that makes great berries for the birds in the fall. They're very high in fat. So that's a valuable service. They also produce a number of caterpillars, believe it or not, that specialize on poison ivy. I know the issue with poison ivy. I get it every year. But when you get poison ivy most often is when you're trying to get rid of it. So my recommendation is just ignore it and, learn what it looks like and avoid it. If you try to get rid of it, that's when you get poison ivy. So.
Well, okay. I think I have just 15 or 20 good ideas to go. Doug Robinson, have we got a final question or two? We've really taken a lot of Dr. Tallamy's time. Again, University of Delaware, entomologist and an extraordinary arborist, as we've heard from tonight's conversation. Anything extra? Any last thoughts?
From me?
Any last thought?
No.
Yeah, and last questions from Doug Robinson, and a last thought or two from Dr. Tallamy.
I don't really have a question, but just a comment. Once again, I'm a bookseller, and here they are, ready to roll. And we have a limited supply of signed book plates from Dr. Tallamy that if you want one to go with your book, please let us know at Eagle Eye Bookshop by emailing us or calling us. And then also we have signed copies of Sally's book also, A Wealthy Man on the Roof of the World. So we have signed copies of that too. And so I think that's about it.
I think we've done trees a great service. I think we've done birds a great service. And we've even made some caterpillars look pretty darn good tonight, better than we might have.
But
Yes.
here's my final thought. We've done ourselves a great service because we're not going to survive on this planet if we get rid of everything else. We depend on the life support systems that nature gives us. So we need to keep nature happy for our own good. We could be selfish about it. That means we need the insects, we need the birds, and the best way to have them is to plant an oak.
Well, when you come back to town, we will dance at Greg Levine's tree sculptures up and down the Beltline. How about
All
that?
right, that
That will
sounds
be
good.
fun. It'll be COVID free and we'll all have
Yeah.
a good time.
Okay.
Let us know when you're coming and we will welcome you. Thank
All
you
right.
everybody for joining us, and hooray for Dr. Tallamy. And I think we all need to go and toast ourselves under an oak tree. Thanks.
All right. Thanks
Go
very
hug a
much.
tree.
Take care.
Thank you.